I'm deaf. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how my voice carries throughout the apartment building. I don't want to disturb people who are sleeping. I'm suffering from asthma. I shall have to try to keep my voice down. I wouldn't make this tape if I didn't feel that it had the potential to be very helpful. What I'm trying to help with is the situation that we have that is best expressed by three factors. One is the dismantling of Build Back Better by Joe Manchin's conservative resistance for the Republicans. Also, by the war in the Ukraine and the situation there with Putin's collapse of sanity, and the insurrection forces of the Trumpytune mafia. I'll begin there because I live in Tacoma, Washington, and I'm from the great state of Pennsylvania and the city of Pittsburgh. I'm a 61-year-old deaf man living with diabetes and almost complete deafness. Nevertheless, I'm an unarmed civilian. I go about my business and I'm approachable. Despite this fact, the forces of the insurrection saw fit, operated through the postal union, to terrorize me by murdering Circe Kennedy and two more of her family. They did this deliberately and in cold blood as part of a warrior code that they have been advocating for. My investigations go way, way back, but so does my condition as a crippled dog. You see them in the park sometimes, limping, whimpering on three legs, and you feel pity for them, but their owners love them and take care of them. It's sort of like the experiment that the South African police considered using Nelson Mandela for, where they thought we'll poison him in the brain and then humiliate the African National Congress by showing him drooling. They decided that was too low. But the faction in the city of Pittsburgh who tortured me as a child didn't think it was too low to do it to me. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a person who has been crippled, who's being used to humiliate himself and the movement that he represents. And that was the purpose in killing Kennedy's, to terrorize me. It was as if to say, if this man was able to hear, he would be capable of great music, and we can't allow that because we want to show the corrupted soul of this type of person. So better that we should take away his hearing entirely so that he can't play music. Better that we should reject him through the music industry so that we can watch his crippled soul. And what we're talking about is the corrections institution and the US military as a secret society engaging in home invasion. And to some extent, they've already built a shrewd and sly technocratic underworld. This technocratic underworld is a junta of odious purposes. Which brings us, of course, to the war in the Ukraine and Russian observers who are encouraged by von Trumpytune. There was a man from Pitt football who moved into my house when I was living in Pittsburgh. He heard my story of childhood when I was brutally attacked, kicked in the head, tortured, gassed, infamously terrorized and driven from a neighborhood by an armed gang. And he said it was one of the most terrible stories he'd ever heard. And then he started calling me a dickhead because I connected the dots that showed that the mentality of his Fuhrer, Ronald Reagan, encouraged people to abuse those who were weaker than them, encouraged the assassins who kidnapped and tortured me, the gangsters who kidnapped and tortured me, and who don't understand how to treat people. And so he went from saying he heard the most terrible story he ever heard to calling me a dickhead and crashing my house. It was appalling the things he started doing to me. So when you get into the actual details of what happened, I'm reminded of a man who posted some of the text of the strange letters I got from Israel back in those days. His name was Rick Vizzuti, and he said, "What a strange web and complex web they weave." One of the things I know from UW Dialectical is that there's a guru in these parts named Michael Foucault, who was a sadomasochistic savage with great intellectual power who went about crucifying himself to create a dialogue about self immolation that he called critiquing reality. And the complex web is based on the idea that the true intellectual giants can keep up with the ongoing critique. And UW Dialectical works with strange weirdos like the woman from the Zappa family, poisoning people and saying, now critique that you have been poisoned. So we're dealing with the criminally insane on one fundamental level. And if you look at some of the details of the facts that I brought to light, you know, when AIDS happened, the Federal Emergency Management Agency switchboard had me stationed at a medical library. So I saw the first, before there was any treatment, representations of this terrible plague. And they had poisoned me with a nerve agent, proceeded to call me up to an island called Mount Desert Island, where they ran a sex escapade of justified contagion, like watch the worm shrink in horror from catching the disease that his betters have planted as holy word, karma. And they made no secret that this was their mentality. But they created their own generation of lampoon. So they not only controlled the people who did it and who were communicating why they did it, but they also controlled the lampoon artists who were saying it was a joke. So they were creating a false dialectic, a framework of working from both sides in a media headquarters. Media controlled the whole thing. So what you have is a situation where, like, Diamond de Gaulle had a namesake named Dia from Der Mans, the band in Philadelphia. Dia from Der Mans calls me on December 8th, 1980. This was before AIDS happened. Diamond de Gaulle was in Satanism studies and immunogenetics back in the 70s. Yet Seattle stupids think she represents the gays in the attack. That's what they created a continuity. She's a friend of Kim Kardashian, Yoko Ono, and this crowd through the Warhol and Peter Gabriel robbing the museum with John Schulman, who created this myth of me as a deaf man who has boundary problems. Why? Because I interrupted, trying to figure out what was going on. I have boundary problems, right? Well, I was a symbol of the United States of America. My grandfather worked for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. My father was a chair of philosophy of education at the University of Pittsburgh. These are important people. I could have mounted something. My mother was voted teacher of the year. My sister was just voted teacher of the year. And they say I didn't amount to something because of my own corruption and invested in this very sly switchboard of technocratic pseudo corrections who surveillance everything around my house. They're peeping Tom mad, and they have a cult of museum hucksters who were robbing the museum with John Schulman and Peter Gabriel in Pittsburgh. Smithsonian caught Schulman with $8 million museum heist, but they're letting Peter Gabriel get away with it. And since I was a child, when they kidnapped and tortured me, they were storing photographs of me in horror and selling them as curiosities to people like Yoko Ono, who had followed my father's voice from the San Jacinto ship in the Navy from the coast of Japan. That's why we're in a nuclear war game about the whole thing. Because Ono has convinced the stupids and queers that they should threaten their own country with nuclear war. That's how stupid they are. In the name of Diamandouros, who was shown to have been in on it, the whole thing. And the only explanation I can find is that John Lennon faked his own assassination with the help of ABC News, which is an affiliate of Disney. Pentagon Disney faked it. So, Putin's going to jump on hold because he's going to say, "Oh, you're accusing me." Well, the thing is Andropov was a suspicious character. And Gabriel was hobnobbing with Moscow in the 80s, so they never said anything about Gail Burstyn, and the wreaking havoc on innocent people, and the whole way that UW dialectical in the name of their military sociology poisoned me in the mouth before COVID went off shows that they were sort of working a survival of the fittest line and thinning the herd, to stave off overpopulation. It was a Trumpytune, Putinese collaboration. So these are the true facts, as I was able to discern them. And that sort of reconnects you to some of the findings that I discovered, like Diamandouros standing outside the World Trade Center with her stiletto before it was Frank Zappa off the face of the earth. So what I'm getting to with this is not just that we have evidence that there were biolab terrors behind the administrative goals of Trumpytune Disney, but that also to see the situation as it is now, you have to understand that this very sly technocratic regime comes out of the computer processes with people directly pointing the finger at the same object over and over and over again for no particularly good reason. I mean, there's nothing in the world, there's no written law that says that a woman couldn't fall in love with me. But they are policing, saying, no, you may not have a girlfriend. They just do it. And none of the politicians, none of the editorialists, none of the hero worshippers who fall in with the Peter Gabriel saint, who cheer the rape of a deaf girl because they see it as karma untwisting its ankle from some sacred voodoo of the Swami Nostra, killing Circe Kennedy. Nobody at all on the face of God's earth has ever objected to my being used this way. It's extremely peculiar in that way. Because for one thing, I'm deaf. So Gallaudet University for the Deaf has a vested interest. It was founded by Abraham Lincoln. And asking, why is this good soldier's son, who was on Bush's ship in the Navy, being purposefully held in a tragicomic penury, doing paintings and so forth, writing poetry and so forth, refused admission to school, refused legal remedy for catastrophic injuries, and being advertised and broadcast in secret all over the planet to titillate the most exotic and eccentric hate criminals who America has ever mongered in international relations. The reason seems to be Barack Obama. Barack Obama seemed to have imagined himself as a sort of witch doctor. He could take the white and turn it into an object that everybody wanted to see sacrificed. It's sort of a Goebbels idea. And if you think that's a stretch, the person who was representing the cult, who set it up, actually physically wrote his admiration for Goebbels in letters that he sent to me from Mount Desert Island. He was working with and for Peter Gabriel through the Gurdjieff Society and Youssou N'Dour of Senegal. They were promoting a gang in Pittsburgh I called the Fern Hollow Bridge Gang because it just collapsed. You might have read about it in the news. Who, as a child, not only molested me horrifically, and made money doing it through this museum theft circuit, but who also put out a song in the 70s called Flame Over Africa, in which they aggrandized the day when environmental convention treaty violations led to global warming. So you have this dude from Senegal yammering in favor of a pro Goebbels crowd who produced Flame Over Africa and who I was investigating as a medical library clerk for their role in the AIDS attack. So this is the reality of the situation. Joe Biden will never say a word about it because of this, pit football stuff, the most terrible story I've ever heard, you dickhead, because I said something against Ronald Reagan. The problem is very well expressed by the very admirable leader of the Ukraine, Zelensky. People have to learn how to treat each other. How you treat each other is important. That's what matters. I was in shock and trauma and staring into space through the whole thing that went on in Iraq. And I'm sure that American soldiers didn't really have that much conscience when it came to what they were doing. People need to have more conscience about what they're doing. You know, it may sound strange, but without conscience, we're stuck in a world which is on the verge of becoming a nuclear football field, which mustn't happen. I mean, that's absolutely insane. So, when you look at a video like this, or you look at my other videos where I present some evidence, if you ever get around to it, if you ever bother, I think what you need to see is that there may be some truth to my concern and allegation that what happened in the Ukraine was from a green light from von Trumpytune to his buddy Putin to raise the stakes, cover up, and divert attention from the investigation that I'm talking about. Because, the long arm of the KGB probably has detected me, and they're thinking, oh, maybe, I doubt that. I'm not a paranoid person. I go out and I go about my business. But I have been attacked as a child and held hostage. I know what it means to be kidnapped and held hostage. I know the trauma that's involved. I've been poisoned with a nerve agent in my mouth by UW dialectical Swami Nostra types. So I know that there's a bond, a working fabric in a sly autocratic, technocratic rage of the machine behind the scenes, the media mecha puppet show. Pulling this hucksterism off for Trumpytune Putinese working together in what they think is some kind of grand slam mayhem. And they don't care about the human rights of civilians, obviously. They murdered our grannies. So the question of whether or not Putin actually himself had a role in all of these outrages. It's beside the point. He's never, ever rationally objected to any of it. He's worked with the people who are clearly behind it. He's advocated for them and he's attacked innocent people. So there's nothing good to be said about it. So where I'm coming from is simple. And if you have any doubt where I'm coming from, all you have to do is replay this and watch it again and listen to what I have to say. It's not really that hard.